Good afternoon. I thought I ought from the very start to confess my ethical bias, which is a utilitarian one. As an economist, economics is based on a broad utilitarian background, and you will quickly have picked that up anyway from the first few slides that I present to you. What I thought would be useful to do in starting off is to really give you an economist's perspective, if you like, as to why animal welfare matters to us in society. And some of this sort of hopefully complements some of the things that were said by Rob and others earlier, and overlaps with some of the ethical issues that we've already started to address. So one of the first reasons why animal welfare matters is the recognition of animal sentience and the fact that there is human empathy for animals suffering, and for animal utility. And the perception that animals suffer is a source of human disutility to us, a source of human dissatisfaction, a welfare loss to us as humans, as individuals. And not going into it in any great depth, many of you from a sort of biological genetics evolution background will know that there is a great literature on the evolution of human empathy, and indeed the co-evolution of empathy in animals and man. The second reason why animal welfare matters to us is linked to something that a number of philosophers have alluded to, which I've called the value of the moral sanction. In other words, we are a species that have ethical considerations, and broadly speaking, we like to think that we are, to some extent at least, doing the right thing. And that gives us, again, utility, that improves our human welfare. The fact that we think that we're doing the right thing, we try to do the right thing. And certainly talking to citizens, consumers generally, in focus groups and doing various surveys and so on, time and time again, doing the right thing in relation to animals seems to relate to concepts that the Farm Animal Welfare Committee have used, giving animals a life worth living, and in particular trying to give animals a good life. Becoming perhaps even more hard-headed, I think there is an underestimation still of the interlinkages between animal welfare and, of course, animal health, but also the links between those and the health, if you like, of the environment and of ecosystems, and human health and human welfare. So you've heard of this one health concept. In many ways, I think that might be extended to a one welfare concept. And certainly it's true that there is a very strong association between animal welfare, the welfare of animals, and human welfare, a very positive association between those two. And in many cases, things that are done in the animal's interests are actually in our interests in one way or another. And I'm thinking about human interests in a very broad way here, and not just about commercial interests, but things that benefit human welfare in all sorts of different ways. Just to pursue this explanation, if you like, of the way that economists see animal welfare, economists, we're simple people, and we view the world in a simple way, and so historically we have seen animals really just as inputs into a production system that are combined with other inputs, transformed, if you like, by the production process to produce things for the benefit of people. So things that provide value, utility to people, that improve human welfare, such as milk, meat, draft power, companionship, all the things that are sources of value for us from animals. And animal welfare doesn't fit into this very simple framework that economists use to understand economic processes. And many things to do with environmental pollution, for example, we call externalities within economics. And animal suffering can be considered to be a negative externality of livestock production. It's not something that's sought for. It is, unfortunately, a byproduct, an unforeseen and unwanted byproduct of livestock production. So animal suffering is a negative externality. Positive animal welfare could be a positive externality. But the point about this is it's very much something, as we'll see, that's external to economic systems. The feedbacks that this shows from animal suffering then is of a number of different sorts. First of all, there's a feedback to inputs. So clearly, if animals are suffering, it may compromise their ability to produce livestock products for us. And, for example, animals may suffer mortality, so quite clearly they're no longer of use to us as inputs if they're not alive, or their productivity may be affected in some way. But as well as that, there may be perceived or actual effects on outputs, particularly in terms of output quality. And as you'll see from some data that I show you later on, very much in consumers' minds there is a link between animal suffering and lower levels of quality of livestock products. And then finally there's this direct effect to human welfare that I've already spoken about, which is that if we perceive animals to suffer and we care about, we have empathy with animals, then that reduces our human welfare directly. So what I want to do is just pursue this idea then of the externality of animal suffering and the public bad aspects, if you like, of animal suffering, because this has some important implications for policy in particular. So what we've seen then is that animal suffering can be considered as an externality of production and consumption processes that involve animals. In many ways you can think of it like environmental pollution, an unwanted byproduct of the production process. It's very much a third-party effect. And really this means, and I like to use the analogy actually, which hopefully is here somewhere, of passive smoking. So you may suffer a welfare loss through passive smoking. You're not someone who produces cigarettes, you don't smoke the cigarettes yourself, etc., etc., but you're a third party who suffers passive smoking as a result of other people's activities. Animal suffering can have the same impact. So you may not have anything to do with production of eggs, and you don't consume cage eggs, but you may feel a disutility if you perceive that animals, hens, are suffering because other people are producing and consuming hen eggs. So that's an externality, a third-party effect that falls on you, and you have no control over that whatsoever. You have no effect, you can have no impact on other people's consumption easily or on the production process. Okay. What we do know as well then is that animal welfare is very much a non-market good. We know that there are various welfare attributes that we associate with different types of products in the marketplace, be it free range, organic or whatever. But animal welfare itself is a non-market good. We don't trade in animal welfare. So again, it's this externality that's not represented by markets. And in particular, animal welfare has no explicit value in money terms and no market price. And you might say, well, you wouldn't expect it to, but that has some really important implications in terms of our use of animals, because resources that don't have an explicit price can often appear to be free, and we know that goods that are free tend to be overexploited because we perceive there to be no cost associated with that exploitation. Okay, so that was a really quick sort of whistle-stop tour of some of the fundamental thinking behind the economics of welfare. But what does this mean then in terms of implications, particularly for policy, which is what we're concerned with today? First and most obviously is we can't then rely on the market. Because of this externality, public bad, public good aspect of animal suffering and animal welfare, that automatically means that markets are not going to bring about the level of animal welfare that we want in society. But it is true, and a couple of people have alluded to this earlier, it is true that the market could work better. And in particular, for example, it is arguable that the market would work much better if we had a better labelling system of animal products that really reflected the animal welfare provenance that lie behind those products. And I know there are all sorts of difficulties in doing that, but when you look at the impact that the egg labelling, mandatory egg labelling had on behaviour, consumer behaviour in particular, then I think it really begs the question, what could be the benefits of a very much more comprehensive system of animal labelling within the European Union at least. So you can't rely on the market, but secondly, some sort of public intervention, and normally we would rely on government to do this. Government intervention is necessary to protect the welfare of animals. And that is often described as a base, but there is no reason why government shouldn't go further than just providing a baseline if the market is found wanting and not supplying that level of animal welfare that we want in society. If there's market failure, that is a very good rationale for government to intervene on society's behalf and try and get things right. And we know that there's a number of ways in which government does that. Most commonly through legislation, regulation, and the enforcement of that regulation. And the 2006 Animal Welfare Act and the duty of care that goes along with that is a good example of that. But there are a whole load of other policy instruments, if you like, and I'm only going to mention a few, that government can actually use to intervene in markets to protect animal welfare. Taxes and subsidies, government uses a lot in various arenas, not in the case really of animal welfare. A whole raft of different institutional arrangements that government can put in place, not only bodies like the Farm Animal Welfare Committee, but other bodies and other institutional arrangements. And in that context, I'm going to make a plug for the idea of an animal health and welfare stewardship programme, which could be along the lines of the agri-environmental programmes, the idea being that such a programme would involve rigorous welfare assessment of farm animals based on welfare outcomes, and also assessment of biosecurity practices, disease risk assessment on farms, and farmers could then be A, helped with the cost of carrying out those things, and B, possibly given some subsidy payments through the rural development monies to actually help to improve health and welfare of farm animals on society's behalf. This is using the argument that the benefits to society would be worth the costs of running such a programme, and I'm going to follow up the difficulties of doing that calculation in a moment. Okay, so I've said that there is a good economic argument, at least, for governments to intervene in the market to ensure the level of animal welfare that we want in society. But there is a big problem for government in justifying its intervention, because it does need to justify intervention in society in terms of some sort of impact assessment, usually involving some sort of weighing up of costs and benefits, advantages and disadvantages of policy. So in order to justify the costs of intervention, policy costs, government needs to be able to quantify the benefits of welfare improvement to have this balancing of costs and benefits of policy. And the problem is, well, how do we do this? Because historically, although a lot of attention has been paid to the costs of improvement to animal welfare, they need to be set against often the substantial benefits of welfare improvements, and we have no way of calculating those benefits very easily. So what remains on the spreadsheet, as it were, is a listing of the costs, but all the cells that could have the benefit values in are empty. And so it's quite easy to see that if you don't understand the benefits of policy and you're only looking at the costs, then it's much less likely that that policy is going to be pursued. Okay, so the approach that we wanted to explore, which is getting on to a bit of research now, is to think about how changes in farm animal welfare could be measured as a result of policy, either ex ante, before policy is actually put in place, or after policy has been put in place. And then to think about how you would value these changes in animal welfare, particularly using what economists call stated preference methods, which you've probably heard of, things like contingent valuation and choice experiment survey methods. And in particular, to be able to apply these methods in a sort of holistic way, that doesn't mean you need to do thousands of different studies and thousands of different estimations every time you want to make a marginal change or a small change in animal welfare policy to improve welfare. So just thinking about how you can measure changes to animal welfare. As we said before, there is great difficulty in taking into account the multiple dimensions of welfare. There are loads of different trade-offs between the different dimensions of welfare, and perhaps many of those trade-offs between housing and feeding and so on shouldn't be made, can't be made. What is needed, and certainly when we talk to people about this, what they say is they want a simple measure of welfare for them to consider. They can't weigh up all the different dimensions of welfare themselves. They really want to be told, is this good welfare or is it not? So what they really want is a single dimension of welfare on a single scale, however unrealistic animal welfare scientists may think that is. When we're looking at policy evaluation, in particular we need a scale that is continuous, that we can think about these small marginal changes in husbandry practices and so on that may have very small improvements in welfare. We need to be able to measure those and value those for policy purposes. We said that policy intervention has largely involved regulation of the animal environment and animal husbandry rather than direct regulation for welfare states. And I think that's quite an interesting and novel idea, that you could set in place regulation that says we don't necessarily care how you achieve it, but the welfare outcomes have to be at a certain level. You have to achieve certain welfare outcomes. So this is not saying that there are certain husbandry practices you can and can't do, but rather you must be able to achieve a certain level of welfare. Now automatically that would mean that there are certain husbandry practices that by definition couldn't achieve certain levels of welfare. But it's a very different way of thinking about animal welfare regulation. And we know that such regulations, such policy interventions that are largely about inputs, usually impact on welfare in many different ways. And there are all sorts of interaction effects. I'm going to have to skip on a little bit. So that's just an overhead looking at interaction effects of just 3 changes in this example in poultry production, looking at changes to space allowances, access to food and litter quality, and you can see the different multiple effects and the interlinkages between the different effects. If you'll excuse me, I'm trying to be far too ambitious, and so I'm going to skip right ahead. Just thinking about how you measure welfare. I'm sure you could read all that as we went through. You've got photographic memory, I know. So. It'll be on the slides that you'll get later on. If we're thinking about how you measure welfare, here's an example of some of the sorts of things that one would have to think about, and this is an example applied to broilers, and I'm sure these are the sorts of things that RSPCA and so on are thinking about and measuring in their current project at the moment. Assure-well, is it? It's Assure-well.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Okay, so things like, of course, absence of injuries of one sort or another, absence of pain, so relating very much to the 5 freedoms, absence of pain caused by management procedures, absence of disease, measured in various different ways, the expression of social behaviours, good human-animal relationships, and the absence of fearfulness. Luckily, we don't have to work out all these interrelationships from scratch. Again, sorry, I'm going to skip all the problems, and I'm going to come to the bottom bit, which is about welfare quality project, which you've already heard quite a lot about. That's a multi-institutional, cross-country, European Union-funded study which has spent years thinking about how you measure welfare and coming up with some fairly detailed welfare protocols. You can't easily read that, but that's just showing how for each production system there are around 30 different measures, different indicators of welfare that then can be boiled down into 4 criteria at the end, or 4 main areas of welfare: good eating, good housing, good health, and appropriate behaviour, that can then be given an overall assessment, either a score or put into a welfare class, so that you can say that this is different levels of welfare. What we wanted to use was a welfare score on a continuous scale. And so, sorry, I'm going to go through that. That's all the justification of why welfare quality is good to use. We wanted to use the welfare quality system on a continuous scale. And so we transferred the welfare classes into a continuous score of 0 to 100, and that's notionally how it translated. And then we took that idea out to citizens and we did a survey. And that's what we told them. And so we told them about the size of animal populations in this country, and then we told them that animal welfare scientists and veterinarians have now developed a system for measuring the welfare status of individual animals that takes account of the varying needs of different species, ages, and so on. The system scores the extent to which the needs and wants of the animal are met, and results in an overall welfare score on a scale of 0 to 100, which accurately represents the welfare status of the animal in terms of its freedom from hunger, thirst, discomfort, pain, etc., etc., the extent to which the animal can express normal behaviours and has a happy and contented life. A score of 0 would denote extreme suffering, whereas a score of 100 would denote the highest level of welfare that could possibly be achieved. The system applies over the entire life of the animal from birth to slaughter and involves regular independent monitoring of the animal's welfare. The important thing is, although my animal welfare scientist friends tell me that this is possible, the important thing isn't so much for my purposes, as to whether that is possible, that scale, but whether people believe it's possible. And people did believe that it's possible, and that scale could exist. Okay. So then, given the credibility of that, we could then go to people and start to explore the valuation that they would give, their willingness to pay, if you like, for changes in the level of that score. And so we looked at different levels of the score. We notionally defined 40 as the statutory minimum, and then we looked at their willingness to pay from 40 to 50 to 60 to 70 to 90. 4 different species. And so we actually did a choice experiment and a contingent valuation. I'm just going to tell you in the 4 minutes I've got left about the choice experiment. I knew you were going to say that. This is basically, for those of you that don't know how a choice experiment works, as a respondent you would be given about 7 or 8 of these, and you have to choose your preferred basket. There are 3 baskets. So, if you really care about the welfare of cows and pigs, okay, then, and you're not too worried that you pay a little bit more in terms of your meat expenditure, you go for basket B. If actually what you're concerned about was your meat expenditure and actually you weren't too bothered about welfare at all, you go for basket C. So not to improve welfare at all, but you don't have to pay anything extra either. So very simply, that's how it works. A bit of detail about what we did. So about 300 respondents, which doesn't sound like many, but statistically for this exercise is sufficient. Let's just move on to results. Okay, which are the important results? Let's skip down to just under 40% of people felt well informed about the way in which farm animals are treated. 72% were concerned about how they were treated. That is quite interesting. 90% of people agreed that we have a moral obligation to safeguard the welfare of animals. And something around 70 to 80% or so of people associated high welfare with better quality of food. Better food safety, that it was healthier for them, that it had better nutritional value, that it tasted better, and that it was better for the environment. So in the minds of consumers, welfare is really very much associated with a whole package of different things that they're interested in. Some results. In terms of meat expenditure, these are annual per household increases. So people would pay £60 a year for a 10-point increase in the welfare scale. So say from 40 to 50 or 50 to 60 if we're looking at a linear relationship. £42 for pigs, £50 for chickens. We did an exercise looking at regulation and taxation, which I'm not going to go into, but the big thing that surprised us, we expected these values to be bigger, higher, but they were lower, and that's something we can talk about in the 30 seconds or whatever that I've got left now. Okay. The score for people was very credible. The willingness to pay estimates that we got were compatible with the totally separate survey that we did using the contingent valuation approach, and were compatible with the sorts of price premium that you'd notice in the shops to do with free-range products and so on. The problem is with meat expenditure is it fails to really adequately capture this public good aspect of welfare. We are hoping to use legislation and payment through taxation as a way of getting an idea about this public good aspect. We failed, and the main reason we failed was because of what economists call payment vehicle bias. A high number of people just objected to the whole idea of paying more tax, and most people didn't trust the government to use the money in the way that. So on those 2 grounds it failed. So we need to explore that a little bit more. Let's go to conclusions. So policy implications then. The big policy implication is we think that this method that we've put together actually could be a practical method to help underpin policy, to support policy. We think it could be suitable for policy evaluation. Overall conclusions, I said at the start, I think there is an underestimation of the importance of animal welfare to human welfare and those linkages. I think more research exploring those linkages would be beneficial. There is a real need to measure the welfare status of animals over time. In the FAWC 2009 report, which was looking backwards and forwards in terms of animal welfare policy, FAWC said, well, we just haven't got adequate data to know what the welfare status of animals is, farm animals is. And actually what we need to do is go out and measure it more. And again, I hope the Assure World project will do some of that. The other thing we noted is you do need policy intervention to protect and improve the welfare of animals. And, you know, when we're thinking from a policy perspective about this necessary weighing up of costs and benefits of policy, we really do need to measure and take full account of the benefits of higher welfare, the benefits of improving welfare, and not just the costs. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.